Alien woman was starving. When I shared my food with her, she couldn't hold back her tears. Jace wiped his brow and adjusted his visor, trying to keep the glare from blinding him. It had been 2 weeks since he arrived on this remote planet, sent to survey it for potential human colonization. So far, it had been nothing but barren deserts, jagged rock formations, and the occasional strange, silent crater. He had expected isolation, but not this sense of complete emptiness. Every sound he made seemed to echo forever, swallowed by the vast expanse of nothingness. And yet he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. Jace paused, scanning the horizon with binoculars. At first, he saw nothing. The sands rippled in waves under the heat, forming illusions that made him doubt his own eyes. Then, moving slowly, almost like a shadow drifting across the dunes, he saw her. A figure, hunched and frail, struggling to carry itself across the sand. She moved with difficulty, her body thin and weak, as if the planet itself was too harsh for her to survive. Jace's heart tightened. He had seen starving creatures on Earth before, but nothing like this. Her skin glowed faintly under the suns, pale with hints of a color he could not name. Her limbs were long and delicate, her movements fragile, yet there was a quiet determination in her slow steps. "Hello," Jace called out softly, careful not to frighten her. The figure froze. Then, after a pause that stretched for what felt like minutes, she raised her head. Her eyes met his, and Jace froze in place. They were large, more expressive than any human eyes he had ever seen. They glimmered with fear, confusion, and he could swear, a trace of hope. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, instinctively, Jace reached into his pack. He knew she needed food. He had rations enough for days, but he couldn't just walk past her and pretend not to notice her suffering. "Here," he said softly, holding out a food bar. She didn't move immediately. Her eyes darted around, as if she was calculating whether this human meant harm. Her breathing was shallow, and Jace noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest. She had clearly not eaten in days. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped closer. Her movements were hesitant, almost like a dance, each step a careful test of trust. She reached out her hands, delicate and trembling. Jace could see that her fingers were slender and tipped with tiny, soft pads instead of nails. She took the food bar, holding it to her chest, then hesitated again. Finally, she opened her mouth, and Jace watched in silence as she bit into the food. Her whole body shivered at the taste, and she made a sound that was almost like a sigh, but deeper, melodic, unlike any human sound he had heard. It carried sadness, relief, and gratitude all at once. Jace stepped back, giving her space. He didn't want to scare her now. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe." Her eyes locked on his, searching, trying to understand the meaning behind his words. She didn't respond verbally, she couldn't, but her gaze softened slightly. Jace realized then that communication would not be easy. She did not speak any language he knew. She had no words that he could understand. But there was something universal here, a shared understanding born from need and compassion. He sat down a few meters away, careful not to corner her. The suns were harsh, but the slight breeze carried tiny grains of sand past them. Jace watched as she ate slowly, savoring every bite, as if she was making it last longer than necessary. He had seen humans in famine, animals in starvation, but there was something deeply moving about this moment. After she finished, she dropped the wrapper onto the sand, then tilted her head, looking at him. Jace could tell she wanted more, but she was waiting, unsure if she could trust him. He reached into his pack again, pulling out more rations. She stepped closer this time, and when he held them out, she took them without hesitation. As she ate, Jace noticed other details. Her skin shimmered slightly under the suns, almost like a soft iridescence. Her hair, or what he assumed was hair, was fine and silver, flowing down her back in waves. Her ears were pointed, delicate, and moved slightly as if responding to sounds he couldn't hear. And her eyes, he couldn't stop looking at them. They reflected the world like water, endless and deep, full of untold stories. He tried to speak again, but she only watched him, tilting her head curiously. Jace realized he would need to find another way to communicate. Words alone would not work. He grabbed a small stick and drew in the sand, a circle for her, a circle for him, a line connecting them. He pointed to her, then to himself, then to the line. Her eyes widened slightly. She mimicked his gesture, drawing her own marks in the sand. Slowly, a fragile dialogue began, not with words, but with symbols and gestures. Hours passed this way. Jace didn't realize how long he had been on the dunes until he noticed the suns beginning to set. The twin lights dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains. The temperature began to drop rapidly, and the wind picked up, carrying fine grains of sand that stung his skin. He looked at her and noticed she shivered. Her body was too thin to handle the cold. "We need shelter," he said. Her head turned slightly and she made a sound, a questioning note soft and trembling. Jace nodded, understanding that she was too weak to travel far. He would need to help her. Slowly, he approached her, speaking softly, using gestures to show she could trust him. Finally, after a tense moment, she allowed him to guide her. He extended his hand, and she touched it lightly, almost as if testing whether it was real. Jace felt a rush of relief. This small touch, so simple, felt monumental. He carefully helped her stand and started toward his transport module, just visible in the distance. The journey was slow. Every step was a struggle for her, and he adjusted his pace, making sure she could keep up. Sand shifted under their feet, and Jace realized that this planet's terrain was unforgiving. Yet, despite the harshness, he felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. Saving a life, any life, was more important than the survey, more important than the mission. When they reached the module, she looked at it with wide eyes. The metal structure gleamed under the last light of the setting suns. Jace opened the door and helped her inside, giving her a place to sit. She stared at the interior, marveling silently, her large eyes reflecting both fear and wonder. Jace sat opposite her, maintaining a respectful distance. He knew that trust could be fragile, and he did not want to push it too quickly. Slowly she relaxed, her shoulders lowering as the tension drained from her small frame. He watched her eat another ration bar, and for the first time she let a tear escape. It slid down her cheek and she didn't try to hide it. Jace's heart clenched. That simple act, the shedding of tears, was a bridge between their worlds. It said more than words ever could. The twin suns disappeared completely, leaving only the soft glow of the stars. Jace realized that this encounter was just the beginning. He didn't know what her story was, why she was alone, or what her people were like. But he did know one thing. Humanity's strength wasn't in its weapons or technology. It was in its empathy, in its ability to reach out, even to those who seemed utterly different. And tonight, on the barren plains of Epsilon 9, a fragile connection had been made. A human and an alien, bound by hunger, fear, and a simple act of kindness. Jace leaned back, watching her as she finally rested, her breathing slowing. Tomorrow, he would have to find a way to communicate more, to understand her world and perhaps to save more than just one life. But for now, the moment itself was enough, a promise of hope, and the first chapter of an extraordinary story. The first night on Epsilon 9 was colder than Jace had expected. The twin suns had vanished beyond the horizon, leaving the sky a deep violet, sprinkled with unfamiliar stars. Inside his transport module, the hum of the life support system was the only sound. The alien woman, Lyria, sat quietly on the padded floor, hugging her knees to her chest. Her eyes, wide and luminous, occasionally glanced at Jace, as if measuring whether he was a friend or a threat. Jace watched her from a corner, careful not to make sudden movements. He had spent hours today just observing, trying to understand. She was fragile, yes, but her intelligence shone in every small gesture. The way she studied him while eating, the cautious tilt of her head, the way her fingers traced patterns on the floor. All these little things told him she was thinking, analyzing, learning. He moved slowly toward his supplies and pulled out more rations. Unlike human food, these were specially packed for interstellar travel, dense in nutrition and easy to digest. He offered one to her again, holding it in both hands to show no harm. She hesitated for a moment, then reached forward with a trembling hand. This time she took the food with a hint of eagerness, as if she had been waiting for more. Jace smiled softly. Seeing her eat gave him a strange feeling of warmth, a satisfaction he had rarely experienced on his missions. "You need to eat more," he said gently. "It's safe. You won't get hurt." She looked at him, her head tilting slightly to the side. Then she made a soft sound, a kind of humming, almost musical. Jace couldn't understand the words, if they were words, but he could feel the emotion behind them. It sounded like gratitude, but also fear. He nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm not going anywhere. You're safe here." Lyria's eyes softened. She ate the food slowly, savoring every bite. When she finished, she sat quietly, staring at her hands. They were delicate and almost translucent, with veins faintly glowing under her skin. Jace noticed how fragile she looked, like the harsh desert could shatter her with a single misstep. He wanted to help her more than just with food. He wanted to know her story, why she was here alone in this barren place. But communication was a challenge. She didn't speak human languages, and he had no translator for her melodic sounds. Jace decided to try another approach. He retrieved a small notebook and pen from his kit and started drawing simple shapes. A circle for her, a circle for him, and a line connecting them, just like he had tried in the sand earlier. He pointed to the circle representing her, then to the line, then to the circle representing him. Her eyes followed his movements carefully. Then slowly, she raised a slender finger and traced a line in the air, mimicking his gesture. Jace's heart leapt. This was a start, a way to communicate without words. He grabbed another pen and drew a small star, pointing to the night sky visible through the module's window. Lyria looked up at the stars, her eyes wide with awe. It was clear she had never seen human technology or structures like his module. Everything was new to her. The metal walls, the soft lighting, the food, the warmth. He realized that she might be far from her home, perhaps stranded or lost. And yet, despite all that, she had survived alone. That resilience made Jace respect her even more. Night passed slowly. The alien woman, exhausted from hunger and travel, finally curled up in a corner of the module. Her breathing evened out, and Jace thought she had fallen asleep. He sat nearby, keeping watch, aware that this was only the beginning of their connection. Morning on Epsilon 9 was harsh. The twin suns rose, casting golden-orange light across the plains. Jace prepared water and more food, offering it to her gently. This time, she didn't hesitate at all. She reached for it immediately, her small hands gripping the container as if it was the most precious thing in the universe. "You're stronger than you look," Jace said softly, trying to reassure her. Lyria tilted her head and made a soft trill, a sound that seemed happy, almost playful. She mimicked his hand gesture as if trying to repeat the human words through movement. Jace laughed quietly, realizing that even though she couldn't speak human words, her spirit was vibrant and expressive. He decided to show her more of his world. Taking a small sample of soil from the module's floor, he held it out to her. Lyria examined it with curiosity, touching it gently with her fingertips. The grains slipped through her fingers like sand, and she made a sound of delight, a melodic note that echoed softly in the module. Jace realized that her senses were different from humans. She seemed to perceive textures, colors, and sounds in ways he could barely imagine. He started experimenting, showing her simple tools, letting her touch and feel everything. With each new experience, she grew more confident, more curious. By midday, Jace decided it was time to venture outside. He wanted her to see the wider world, but he also wanted to ensure her safety. The desert was dangerous, sharp rocks, sudden drops, and the relentless heat. He opened the module's door slowly and gestured for her to follow. She hesitated at first, then stepped outside, the sun's warming her delicate skin. She blinked against the light, shielding her eyes with her hand. When she finally adjusted, she looked around in awe. The dunes stretched endlessly, the rocks glittered in the sunlight, and small alien plants poked through the sand in rare patches. Jace pointed to a distant rock formation and made a walking motion. Lyria mimicked him, stepping carefully, following his lead. Together, they explored the nearby terrain, slowly building trust through movement and shared experience. At one point, she stumbled on a small rock. Jace caught her quickly, steadying her. She looked up at him with wide eyes, and for the first time she reached out to touch his face gently. The gesture was simple but profound, a sign of trust, of acceptance. Jace felt a warmth in his chest he had not felt in years. They continued exploring, and Jace showed her small creatures scuttling across the sand, tiny plants that could survive without water for weeks. Lyria watched everything with fascination, occasionally touching a plant or leaning close to examine an insect. Jace smiled quietly. Her curiosity reminded him of humans, the same drive to understand the world, to explore and learn, even in the harshest conditions. By late afternoon, the heat became unbearable. They returned to the module, and Jace helped her inside. He noticed that she was less tense now, more relaxed in his presence. She had started to understand that he meant no harm, that he only wanted to help. Sitting across from her, he offered more food and water. She accepted without hesitation, eating with careful attention. As she finished, she looked at him, her eyes glistening, and then unexpectedly a single tear rolled down her cheek. Jace reached out, gently touching her hand. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." She made a soft sound again, a mixture of relief and gratitude. It was clear that this simple act of sharing food and care meant more to her than he could ever explain. It wasn't just survival, it was trust, hope, and the beginning of a connection that transcended species. The suns began to set again, painting the sky in shades of red and purple. Jace realized that tomorrow they would need to learn even more from each other. Communication, understanding, and cooperation would be key. She was not just an alien, she was a being capable of thought, emotion, and connection. Humanity's greatest strength, he thought, was empathy, and here, in the middle of a barren desert, it was bridging the gap between two worlds. That night, as she slept peacefully for the first time in days, Jace made a promise to himself. He would protect her, help her, and try to understand her world. And perhaps in doing so, he would learn something important about humanity itself, the power of kindness, patience, and courage. Outside the module, the wind blew across the desert, carrying grains of sand like tiny stars in the air. Inside, two beings from different worlds rested, bound together by a simple, profound truth. In a vast and often harsh universe, even the smallest acts of care could change everything. And Jace knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning. The morning light on Epsilon 9 poured into the transport module, filling the small space with a warm, orange glow. Jace stirred awake first, careful not to startle Lyria. She was still asleep, curled up in the corner, her breathing slow and even. He watched her for a moment, fascinated by her delicate features, the way her silver hair shimmered under the suns, and the subtle movements of her chest as she inhaled and exhaled. Jace had learned a lot about survival in harsh environments, but nothing had prepared him for the experience of sharing life with another species. He had rescued many creatures on Earth, animals that depended on humans for survival, but Lyria was different. She was intelligent, aware, and profoundly vulnerable at the same time. He decided it was time to start building a bridge between their worlds, beyond simple gestures of food and safety. If she was to survive here, they needed to communicate. Words would not suffice, not yet. He needed to find a way to share ideas, feelings, and knowledge through observation, gestures, and symbols. He gently placed his hand on the module floor and drew a circle, representing her. Then another circle, representing himself. Between the two, he drew a line just as he had before. Lyria opened her eyes and looked at him. When she saw the circles and the line, she tilted her head and made a soft, questioning trill. It was her version of asking a question. "Yes," Jace whispered. "I want to share with you. You and I, we can learn from each other." She blinked, and for the first time, she mimicked his hand movements exactly, tracing the circles and the line in the air. Jace smiled. This was a breakthrough. Words were not necessary. They had found a small, shared language of gestures and understanding. Over the next few hours, they experimented with this new method. Jace would draw simple shapes, a tree, a sun, a rock. Lyria would respond by pointing, touching, or creating her own shapes in the air. He noticed that her memory was incredible. She remembered the symbols and repeated them accurately, even combining them in ways he had not expected. "You are clever," he said, amazed. "Much clever than I thought." Her eyes sparkled at his words, or what he assumed were words. She made a soft, melodic trill, almost a laugh, and traced her hand through the air, circling him twice. Jace laughed softly. He realized that laughter, even without sound, could cross worlds. After breakfast, Jace decided it was time to explore more of the planet. Lyria followed him carefully, stepping into the harsh desert sun for the first time since he had found her. Her skin glowed under the sunlight, pale and luminous, and she flinched at the heat at first. He offered her a simple visor, a lightweight shade from his supplies. She took it cautiously and adjusted it over her eyes, looking around with newfound curiosity. The desert was alive in ways Jace had not expected. Tiny creatures darted across the sand, their movements almost invisible unless you watched closely. Small plants, resilient to the harsh climate, pushed through cracks in the rocks. Lyria crouched low, her eyes following every motion. She reached out to touch a tiny creature with her delicate hand. The creature paused, then scuttled away, and she let out a soft trill of delight. "See," Jace said, "life is everywhere, even here." She looked at him, her expression a mixture of awe and understanding. She reached out, touching his hand gently. For a moment their fingers brushed, and Jace felt an odd, profound connection. It was more than survival, it was recognition. She was intelligent, aware, and capable of emotion, just as humans were. As they walked further, Jace began to share more of human knowledge in small ways. He drew in the sand diagrams of the planets they had visited, simple maps showing his route, and shapes representing water, plants, and the suns. Lyria watched intently, her eyes flicking back and forth between the drawings and the environment around her. Slowly, she began mimicking his gestures, tracing patterns in the sand with a stick, and sometimes pointing to features in the environment to match his symbols. They paused by a small cluster of rocks, shaded just enough to provide relief from the sun. Jace handed her more rations and water, and she ate carefully, her eyes never leaving him. After a moment, she picked up a small rock and traced a symbol on it with her finger. Jace leaned closer, seeing a tiny, detailed circle connected to another, much like the diagrams he had been drawing. He nodded, understanding that she was starting to use her own form of communication. "You're learning fast," he said. "I think we can understand each other soon." She tilted her head, humming a melodic sound that seemed like laughter. Then she traced a series of lines in the sand, connecting shapes in ways Jace hadn't anticipated. His eyes widened. She was not just mimicking him, she was thinking, creating, and forming ideas independently. Jace realized the depth of her intelligence. She was not merely surviving, she was learning, analyzing, and adapting. And yet, despite her brilliance, she was vulnerable. Her thin frame, delicate skin, and large expressive eyes made it clear that she could not endure the harsh climate of Epsilon 9 for long without protection and care. As the suns moved higher in the sky, Jace led her to a shallow canyon nearby, one he had noticed during his initial survey. The canyon provided shade and shelter from the heat and wind. He showed her how to crouch safely under the rock overhang, pointing out areas where small creatures had made nests or burrows. Lyria observed carefully, mimicking his actions, and even imitating the way he crouched low to avoid the sun. For several hours, they rested, eating, drinking, and learning from each other. Jace introduced her to more of his supplies, showing her how to open containers, how to drink safely from a canteen, and how to identify edible plants he had brought from Earth. Lyria absorbed every lesson with incredible focus, her eyes wide and attentive. By afternoon, Jace decided to try something riskier. He would let her explore a little farther on her own. He gestured toward a small rock formation a short distance away. Lyria looked at him uncertainly, but he smiled and nodded. Slowly, she walked toward the rocks, her steps careful but determined. Jace watched, ready to intervene if she stumbled. She reached the rocks and crouched to examine a small patch of plants growing in the cracks. She touched them gently, then made a series of soft trills, almost as if she were communicating with the plants themselves. Jace smiled, amazed by her curiosity and empathy. "Look at that," he whispered. "You're not just surviving, you're connecting with life here." Lyria looked at him, her eyes shining. She reached out and touched his hand again, a gesture of shared understanding and gratitude. Jace felt a warmth in his chest, a deep satisfaction that went beyond the success of his mission. He had rescued a life, yes, but he had also witnessed the beginning of a connection that transcended species, language, and even worlds. As the suns began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the canyon, Jace realized that this day had changed everything. Lyria was more than just a survivor. She was intelligent, emotional, and capable of forming bonds. And he, in turn, was learning what humanity truly meant: empathy, patience, and the willingness to reach out to others, even when the differences seemed insurmountable. They returned to the module as the light faded, both of them tired but filled with a sense of accomplishment. Lyria ate another ration, and this time she did not hesitate or fear. She had learned to trust him. And in doing so, she had taught him something invaluable. That connection and understanding were more powerful than any technology or weapon. That night, as she slept peacefully for the first time in many days, Jace sat nearby, watching over her. He reflected on the day's events, on the lessons learned, and on the bond that had begun to form. He realized that this was more than a simple act of survival. It was the start of something extraordinary. Outside, the wind blew across the desert, carrying tiny grains of sand like sparkling dust in the air. Inside, two beings from different worlds rested, bound together by trust, curiosity, and the quiet magic of shared understanding. And Jace knew, deep in his heart, that this was only the beginning. Tomorrow he would continue to teach her, to learn from her, and to explore this strange, harsh world together. But for now, the quiet connection between human and alien, born from simple acts of care and the courage to reach out, was enough. It was a promise of hope, of friendship, and of the extraordinary possibilities that could emerge when two worlds met with empathy and respect. The next morning, the desert of Epsilon 9 seemed quieter than usual. The twin suns had risen, casting long shadows across the dunes, painting the sands with streaks of gold and orange. Jace rose early, carefully checking his supplies and preparing more rations for Lyria. She was already awake, sitting near the module window, watching the desert in silence. Her large eyes reflected the rising suns, shimmering with curiosity and a hint of worry. Jace walked over and offered her some food. She took it immediately, her hands steady this time. He noticed how much stronger she seemed compared to the first day. Her energy was returning, though she was still thin and fragile. "We need to explore further today," Jace said softly, "but we must be careful. This desert is not forgiving." Lyria looked at him, her eyes wide, and made a soft trill, as if asking what he meant. Jace pointed to the horizon, then made a walking gesture. He drew a small map in the sand with a stick, marking the dunes, the module, and a rocky area nearby that might provide more shelter. She watched carefully, tracing the lines with her finger, understanding without words. They stepped outside, the harsh suns immediately warming their skin. Jace led her toward the rocky formation, guiding her with gentle touches and gestures. At first, the walk was calm, almost peaceful. Lyria's curiosity shone as she examined small plants and creatures along the way. She touched a tiny burrowing animal, careful not to scare it, and made a delighted trill when it scuttled back into its hole. But the peace did not last. Without warning, the winds shifted. Jace noticed the subtle change first. The sand began to rise in small clouds, swirling around them. Then came the low rumble, distant but growing steadily. A sandstorm was approaching, faster than anything he had anticipated. "Lyria!" Jace shouted, grabbing her hand. She froze at first, confusion in her eyes. He pointed toward the module, then motioned for her to run. But the winds were already strong, whipping grains of sand into their faces. Lyria squinted, shielding her eyes with one hand while holding onto Jace with the other. The sandstorm hit them like a wall. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The heat and force of the wind made every step a struggle. Lyria stumbled, her thin frame buffeted by the gusts. Jace grabbed her quickly, pulling her close. "Hold on," he shouted over the roaring wind. "We're almost there." Every step toward the module felt like an eternity. The sand tore at their clothing, stung their skin, and filled their lungs with grit. Jace felt fear for the first time in weeks, not for himself, but for Lyria. She was small, fragile, and far less equipped to survive this storm than he was. He realized that if they didn't reach shelter immediately, she might not survive the night. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, they reached the module. Jace pushed the door open, dragging Lyria inside. She collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily. He followed, shutting the door against the relentless storm outside. The module shuddered as the wind slammed against its walls. Lyria looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. She was shaking, not just from exhaustion, but from the terror of what they had just endured. Jace knelt beside her, placing his hand over hers. "You're safe now," he said gently. "I won't let anything happen to you." She made a soft trill, a sound that seemed almost like a sigh of relief. Then, unexpectedly, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Jace reached out and gently wiped it away, understanding in that instant the depth of her fear and gratitude. The storm raged outside for hours. Jace stayed close to her, offering water and comfort, explaining the situation through gestures and simple words. Lyria listened, mimicking some of his hand movements and tracing patterns in the air to show that she was understanding. By mid-afternoon, the storm had calmed enough for them to see the desert outside, though visibility remained low. The sands were churned into strange shapes by the wind, and small debris littered the area. Jace realized that they needed a more secure shelter if they were to survive this planet's harsh conditions. The module was safe for now, but the next storm might not be so forgiving. "We need to prepare," he told Lyria. "We can survive here, but we need to plan." She looked at him, her eyes wide with understanding. She mimicked his gesture of building and pointing toward the module. Jace smiled. She was learning fast. He gathered supplies, more food, water, and equipment. He showed her how to secure the module doors, how to check for weak points in the structure, and how to create simple sand barriers outside to protect against wind. Lyria watched closely, her movements careful and deliberate. She even helped him lift small pieces of debris to reinforce the module's walls. As they worked, Jace began to notice more about her abilities. Despite her fragile appearance, she was strong in ways humans rarely were. She could move quickly when needed, balance on uneven terrain with ease, and sense changes in the environment with incredible precision. He realized that her species had adapted to survive harsh conditions, though clearly not the extreme deserts of Epsilon 9. By evening, they had fortified the module as best as they could. Lyria had learned to follow his instructions and even anticipate his next steps. Jace felt a deep respect for her. She was more than just a survivor. She was intelligent, adaptive, and resourceful. They sat inside, exhausted, watching the sunset through the module window. The sky was ablaze with color, deep purples and reds blending into the darkening horizon. Lyria traced the patterns in the sky with her fingers, pointing to the suns, then to herself, then to Jace. He nodded, understanding that she was sharing her thoughts, her wonder, and perhaps a little of her story. "You're safe now," he whispered again. "Tomorrow we'll explore further. We'll learn more about this place together." Lyria responded with a soft trill and a gentle touch to his hand. Jace felt a surge of hope. They had faced the storm and survived. She had trusted him, and he had protected her. Their bond was growing stronger, formed not just from necessity, but from mutual respect and care. That night, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon and the desert fell into darkness, the module became a small island of warmth and safety. Jace sat close to Lyria, keeping watch over her, ensuring she rested peacefully. The storm had tested them, but they had endured. And in the quiet aftermath, he realized something profound. Survival was not just about food, water, or shelter. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to face danger together. As the stars appeared in the Epsilon 9 sky, Jace allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had come to this planet to survey it for human colonization, expecting to chart land, record resources, and report findings. Instead, he had discovered something far more valuable: life, intelligence, and the beginnings of a friendship that crossed worlds. He glanced at Lyria, sleeping peacefully, her breathing even, her small hand resting near his. She had trusted him completely, and he had kept her safe. That bond, he realized, was stronger than any technology or weapon. It was something uniquely human, yet universally powerful, the ability to care, to protect, and to understand. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, whispering through the desert. Jace knew that more challenges awaited. The planet was harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. But he also knew that together, he and Lyria could face it. They had survived the storm. They had learned to trust each other, and they had discovered something even more important: hope. Tomorrow, they would venture further into the desert. They would explore, learn, and perhaps encounter new dangers. But for now, they were safe, connected, and alive. And in that moment, Jace understood something he had never realized before. In a universe filled with uncertainty and peril, the greatest strength of all was the courage to reach out, to help, and to trust. And tonight, in the quiet module on a remote desert planet, human and alien rested together, ready to face whatever the future might hold. The morning on Epsilon 9 was calm after the previous day's storm. The twin suns rose slowly over the horizon, painting the desert in golden light. Jace stood outside the module for a moment, breathing in the dry air and listening to the faint hum of the desert wind. It was a rare moment of peace, but he knew it would not last. This planet was unpredictable, harsh, and full of hidden dangers. Inside the module, Lyria was awake. She had been watching him silently through the small window, her large eyes reflecting curiosity and trust. Over the past days, she had grown stronger. Her frame was still thin, but she moved with more confidence. She had learned from Jace, adapting quickly to his instructions, his gestures, and his careful guidance. "Good morning," Jace said softly, offering her a food bar and a container of water. She took both immediately, eating quickly but carefully. After they had eaten, Jace began preparing for their next journey. He had decided to take Lyria beyond the nearby canyon to explore the larger desert. The storm had made him realize that knowledge of the land was essential for survival. They needed to find water sources, shelter, and signs of life that could help sustain them. Lyria watched as he packed supplies, mimicking his actions. She began to organize rations herself, stacking them neatly and pointing to each container as if asking a question about it. Jace smiled, realizing how much she had learned in just a few days. "You are learning quickly," he said. "Soon you will understand everything we need to survive out there." Her soft trill sounded almost like laughter. She reached out and touched his hand gently, a gesture of trust and friendship. Jace felt a warmth in his chest. This bond, he realized, was far more important than any mission, report, or survey. They stepped outside, the suns warming their skin and casting long shadows across the dunes. Lyria followed him carefully, her movements confident but cautious. Jace led her toward a ridge he had spotted from the module, an elevated position that might offer a better view of the desert and potential resources. As they walked, Jace observed her closely. She was not just learning from him. She was observing the environment, noticing patterns, and making decisions based on what she saw. At one point, she paused, tilting her head toward a small patch of plants. Jace followed her gaze and realized that this area might have water underground. "Good eye," he said, pointing to the patch. "Let's check it out." Together, they dug carefully, using small tools from Jace's kit. Lyria's hands were delicate but precise. Within minutes, they uncovered a small water source, just enough to sustain them for the next few days. Lyria trilled softly, her eyes wide with amazement. She reached out and touched Jace's hand again, her way of saying thank you. "This is good," Jace said. "We can survive here. We just need to work together." The suns climbed higher, and the desert grew hotter. Jace decided it was time to rest in the shade of a rocky outcrop. He guided Lyria to a small alcove, showing her how to sit safely and avoid the harsh sun. She copied his actions exactly, demonstrating her understanding and growing independence. While they rested, Jace tried to communicate more about his world. He drew simple diagrams in the sand, maps, shapes, and symbols representing water, food, and shelter. Lyria traced the shapes with her fingers, copying and even improving on some of his diagrams. He realized that she was not just learning, she was thinking creatively, solving problems in ways humans might not have considered. "You're brilliant," he whispered. "You understand more than I can explain." Her eyes shone at his words. She made a soft, melodic trill, reaching out to touch his arm. Jace knew that in her way she was expressing gratitude and connection, the kind of bond that went beyond words. After a short rest, they continued toward the ridge. The walk was long and the terrain rough. The desert tested them at every step with uneven rocks, hidden crevices, and occasional gusts of wind, but together they adapted. Jace guided her carefully, and Lyria observed keenly, learning to anticipate dangers before they arrived. As they reached the ridge, the view took their breath away. The desert stretched endlessly, but in the distance, Jace could see signs of life, clusters of plants, small water sources, and tiny creatures moving among the dunes. It was a reminder that survival was possible, even in this harsh world. Lyria climbed the ridge with surprising agility, her movements precise and deliberate. At the top, she stood beside Jace, looking out over the landscape. For a moment, the two of them were silent, simply observing the vastness of the planet. The bond they had formed was stronger than ever, a partnership built on trust, survival, and mutual respect. "This is only the beginning," Jace said softly. "Together we can learn this world, understand it, and thrive." Lyria looked at him, then made a series of soft trills, pointing to the horizon, then to herself, and finally to him. Jace understood. She was saying that she would follow him, trust him, and work with him to survive. The day passed with exploration, learning, and careful observation. Jace showed her how to identify edible plants, find shelter, and detect signs of water. Lyria absorbed every lesson with incredible focus, occasionally demonstrating knowledge or intuition that surprised him. She was proving that intelligence and survival instinct could surpass any preconceived limits. As the suns began to set, they returned to the module, carrying samples of plants and small stones as evidence of their discoveries. Lyria placed her collection carefully, arranging them in neat patterns. Jace smiled, recognizing her natural curiosity and desire to understand the world. That night, as they rested, Jace reflected on the events of the past days. Lyria had come to him weak, starving, and vulnerable. Now she was stronger, confident, and learning. And he, in turn, had discovered something extraordinary. The true power of humanity was not in technology, weapons, or exploration alone, but in empathy, courage, and the ability to reach out across boundaries. Suddenly, a soft alarm from his module indicated a change in the weather. The sensors picked up a new storm forming in the distance, approaching quickly. Jace rose immediately, waking Lyria gently. "We need to prepare," he said. "Another storm is coming." She nodded, understanding instantly. Together, they reinforced the module, securing the doors, windows, and any loose items. Lyria mimicked his actions perfectly, showing that she had learned quickly how to protect herself and their shared shelter. As the storm arrived, the winds howled, carrying sand and debris. But this time they were ready. Jace and Lyria stayed close, sharing water and encouragement. They had learned to trust each other completely. No words were needed, the bond itself was a shield against fear. The storm raged for hours, but inside the module they remained safe. Lyria watched Jace with wide eyes, occasionally trilling softly as if acknowledging their teamwork. Jace reached out, gently taking her hand. "We are stronger together," he said. "Always." When the storm finally subsided, the desert lay quiet once more. The night sky was filled with stars, more brilliant than ever. Lyria sat beside Jace, looking up in awe. She made soft trills and pointed to the stars, tracing patterns in the air. Jace realized that she was communicating wonder, curiosity, and hope, a shared understanding of beauty and life. In that moment, he knew that their journey was only beginning. Together, they could explore, survive, and learn from each other. The bond between human and alien had grown into something extraordinary, a new alliance capable of facing the universe's challenges. Jace reached out to touch her hand gently. "We've come a long way," he said, "but this is only the beginning. Tomorrow, we explore further." "We survive, we thrive." Lyria looked at him, her eyes shining, and trilled softly in agreement. She touched his hand again, a silent promise of trust, friendship, and partnership. As the night deepened, Jace and Lyria rested side by side. They had faced hunger, storms, and fear together. They had discovered trust, courage, and understanding across species. And they had realized that in a universe filled with unknown dangers, the greatest strength was empathy, the ability to care, to protect, and to connect. Epsilon 9 was vast, harsh, and challenging. But in the quiet module under the starlit sky, human and alien had found safety, companionship, and hope. They were no longer two beings alone in the desert. They were a team, a partnership, and a new kind of alliance. And Jace knew, deep in his heart, that whatever challenges the future held, together they could face them all. They had shared food, trust, and courage. They had survived storms, learned each other's ways, and discovered the power of connection. This was humanity at its best, kind, brave, and willing to reach out across worlds. And this was only the beginning of their story. The twin suns had set, the stars shone brightly, and two beings from different worlds rested together, ready for the adventures, dangers, and discoveries that awaited.